She walked through the crowded hallways every day feeling like she was invisible. People rushed past her with little more than a glance, their conversations loud and full of life while she moved quietly along the edges. Sometimes she wondered if anyone would even notice if she just disappeared for a day. The lockers slammed, the shoes squeaked, and the chatter filled every corner, but none of it seemed to touch her. She smiled politely at a classmate who barely remembered her name from last week, and then she kept walking. It wasn't that she wanted to be noticed for nothing. She just wished someone could see the little pieces of her that mattered. At home, things were not much different. Her parents were busy with work. Her siblings had their own worlds, and the small apartment felt too big and too empty at the same time. She often sat by the window for hours, watching people go by on the street below. She noticed the way neighbors talked to each other, the way kids laughed and ran, the way life seemed to burst in color all around her while she felt trapped in gray. She loved drawing, but even her sketches often went unseen, tucked away in a notebook that only she touched. She wrote little poems sometimes, lines she whispered to herself at night, hoping maybe one day someone would hear them. She longed to be known, to be more than a shadow passing through the world. At school, she tried to join conversations, to raise her hand in class, to laugh at jokes she didn't quite get, but it rarely worked. People smiled politely, nodded, and moved on. Teachers never seemed to call on her, and group activities often left her standing at the edge, unsure if she was part of the team or just a body that happened to be there. She noticed it, the small cracks in the walls between herself and everyone else. She noticed the way friends whispered in corners and looked over their shoulders, but never included her. Every day she told herself that it was okay, that she didn't need their approval. But deep down she wanted just one person to see her. Her classes were long and dull, filled with numbers, dates, and facts that seemed disconnected from her life. Sometimes she would drift into her own world, imagining a different place where people listened, where voices mattered, and where she could laugh freely without worrying about being overlooked. Her notebooks filled with doodles, curved lines, abstract shapes, little characters she made up in her mind. It was her escape, her way to fill the silence that wrapped around her like a heavy blanket. At lunch, she often sat alone on a bench under a tree, a book in her lap or her thoughts wandering far away. She watched others play, joke, and share secrets, feeling a mixture of envy and admiration for the ease with which they moved through their lives. She loved music, though she rarely spoke of it. Sometimes she hummed softly under her breath in the hallway, a tune she made up herself, and if someone heard, they didn't say anything. They just walked on. Music was her secret friend, the one thing that seemed to understand her when the world did not. She had no instrument at home, only the imaginary piano she played in her head, each note forming a small bubble of joy that never quite left her chest. She imagined herself performing, though she never dared to dream too far. It was safer to stay invisible, safer to keep the small sparks of talent and hope tucked away where no one could judge or dismiss them. On weekends, she wandered through the quiet streets of her neighborhood, noticing small things others might miss, the pattern of cracks on the sidewalk, the way sunlight bounced off the windows, the soft hum of wind through the trees. Sometimes she paused to watch a street musician, her fingers twitching with a desire to play along, though she never did. She admired the courage it took to be seen, to let people hear your soul through music. She wanted that more than anything, but she didn't yet know how to reach it. Her best friend was her imagination. She created stories about people she passed on the street, imagined their lives and the things they might be feeling. She whispered these stories to herself, laughed quietly at moments she alone understood. She pretended that someday someone would listen, someone would care about what she had to say. It was a fragile hope, but it was hers, and it kept her moving, kept her trying to make sense of a world that seemed to flow around her without noticing. Even in moments of quiet despair, she found little joys. A small flower growing between cracks in the pavement, the sound of rain tapping on the window, a song that played faintly from a distant radio. She noticed the little things, the world in its smallest details, and though it often felt lonely, it also gave her a deep appreciation for beauty that others seemed to overlook. It was a secret world, one she held close, and in some ways it was comforting. Her teachers saw her as quiet, obedient, and polite. They never called on her in class unless they had to, and when they did, her answers were sometimes met with polite nods and then forgotten. She tried to participate, to ask questions, but it often felt like speaking into a void. At assemblies, she sat near the back, watching the others laugh, clap, and cheer, feeling as though she were behind a glass wall that no one could break. She longed to be part of the excitement, to be noticed not just for following rules but for who she was inside. At home, her parents meant well, but they were busy. They asked about homework and chores, about grades and responsibilities, but rarely about feelings or dreams. She tried to share small pieces of her inner world, but conversations ended quickly or shifted to practical matters. She didn't blame them. It wasn't their fault. The world moved fast and everyone had their own struggles. But sometimes late at night she sat on her bed and imagined someone listening, someone seeing her completely. It was a small wish, simple and fragile, yet it burned quietly in her heart. She noticed small things about people that others missed, a twitch of a smile, a flicker of sadness behind a friend's eyes, the way a teacher's voice softened when they spoke about something they loved. She carried these observations like treasures, little proof that there was more beneath the surface of life than what met the eye. She longed to be noticed the same way, to have someone see her for who she really was. But for now she stayed quiet, careful, invisible. Sometimes she thought about giving up, about letting the world pass her by without leaving a mark. But then she would find herself humming a tune, tracing patterns in her notebook, or watching the rain and feeling a quiet thrill of life. It was these small sparks that reminded her that she mattered, even if no one else seemed to notice. And though she felt invisible, she carried a deep hope that one day something would change, that one day the world would see her, not as a shadow, but as someone unforgettable. And so she moved through her days with quiet determination. She smiled politely, helped when she could, and kept her secret world close to her heart. She observed, she imagined, she dreamed, and while the world might not notice yet, she held on to the smallest pieces of hope because she knew, somewhere, somehow, she would find her place, and the world would hear her story. The music she felt inside her, though silent for now, was waiting. And one day it would speak. One afternoon, while wandering through the quiet halls of the school, she noticed a small door she had never seen before. It was tucked behind the music room, half hidden by a stack of chairs. Curious, she slowly pushed it open, and her eyes widened at what she saw inside. The room was filled with sunlight that poured through large windows, illuminating rows of instruments neatly placed on their stands. But it wasn't the drums or the guitars that caught her attention. It was the piano, standing in the center, polished and waiting as if it knew she was coming. She hesitated at the doorway, unsure if she had the right to enter. The room smelled faintly of wood polish and old sheet music. Her fingers itched to touch the piano, but a small voice inside her said she might not belong. She took a careful step inside and then another until she was standing before it. She rested her hands lightly on the keys and felt a thrill run through her. The piano felt alive, as if it were breathing under her touch. She pressed a key softly, and the sound filled the room, surprising her with its clarity and warmth. She smiled for the first time that day, feeling a strange sense of home in a place she had never known existed. At first, she could only play simple notes, experimenting and testing what each key could do. She didn't know how to read music, but that didn't stop her. She let her fingers move freely, following the rhythms that came to her naturally. The piano responded, each note echoing in the room like a small conversation between her and the instrument. Hours could pass without her noticing as she lost herself in the sound. She hummed along quietly, adding her own melody, feeling a joy she had never known in the silent corners of her life. She began visiting the music room whenever she could, slipping in after classes or during breaks when no one else was around. It became her secret sanctuary, a place where she could be herself without fear of judgment or invisibility. The piano, once just a piece of furniture, became her companion, her voice, and her refuge. She discovered that even when no one was watching, she could create something beautiful that made her heart sing. Each note, each chord was a small triumph, a proof that she existed in a world that often ignored her. As days turned into weeks, her confidence grew. She learned to play more complex sequences, experimenting with rhythm and timing. She made mistakes, of course, hitting wrong notes and fumbling through passages. But she also discovered that mistakes were not failures. They were part of learning, part of expressing herself. The music room became a place where she could explore her own creativity, without the pressure of being noticed or approved. She found a freedom there that she had never felt in the crowded hallways of school. or the silent rooms of her home. One afternoon, she found an old piece of sheet music tucked into a drawer. The notes were faded and some corners torn, but the melody seemed to call to her. She studied it carefully, trying to decipher the rhythm and the flow. At first it was challenging, and she stumbled through the notes, frustrated by her own limitations. But she persisted, determined to understand the song. Slowly, note by note, she began to play it correctly. And when she did, the sound filled the room in a way that made her heart swell. It was as if the piano was speaking to her, saying, "You can do this. You belong here." Her secret moments with the piano changed her. She started walking through the halls with a little more confidence, carrying a quiet pride in her chest. She no longer felt completely invisible, because she had found a place where she mattered. Even though no one else knew about her talent, she felt it deeply, in the way her hands moved and her heart beat in rhythm with the music. The piano had given her a voice that didn't rely on anyone else's attention. Sometimes she imagined performing in front of others. The idea both thrilled and terrified her. What if they laughed? What if they ignored her, just like everyone else? But then she remembered the joy she felt when playing alone, the way each note made her feel alive and free. She realized that whether anyone listened or not, the music was hers. It belonged to her spirit, her heart, and that was enough to keep her going. She began to dream bigger. She imagined her fingers dancing over the keys in front of a crowd, people listening and smiling, feeling the music in their hearts. She imagined someone recognizing her, finally seeing the part of her that had been hidden for so long. It was a fragile hope, but it was powerful, giving her something to reach for beyond the quiet corners of her life. Every day she practiced, she carried that hope like a small flame, growing brighter with each note she learned. At home, she started humming tunes she had created at the piano. Her parents noticed the change in her demeanor, the spark of excitement in her eyes, but they didn't fully understand it. They asked about school, about homework, and about chores, but she simply smiled and nodded, knowing that her true joy was something private and precious. She didn't need anyone else to understand yet. It was enough that she herself knew the magic she had found. She began to notice how music influenced her other parts of life. She became more observant, more patient, and more willing to take small risks. A difficult math problem in class seemed less daunting, because she had learned patience and persistence at the piano. A conversation with a classmate became easier, because she had discovered confidence in her own abilities. Slowly, the invisible girl was beginning to feel stronger, not because others had noticed her, but because she had discovered something inside herself that was undeniable. Her secret world and her growing talent gave her hope that the future might be different. She imagined showing someone her music, sharing it in a way that could make them see her in a new light. The thought both scared her and excited her, but it also made her feel alive. The piano had become more than just an instrument. It was a doorway to a world where she could be recognized, not for fitting in, but for who she truly was, and so, she continued to return to the music room, each visit strengthening her connection with the piano and with herself. Each day her skills grew, her confidence deepened, and her dreams became a little more tangible. The world outside the music room still moved fast and often overlooked her, but inside she had discovered a place where she mattered. The piano had become her voice, her refuge, and her spark of hope. It was the beginning of a journey that would slowly transform the girl who had once been invisible into someone unforgettable. She started visiting the music room every day she could, slipping inside quietly when the hallways were empty. Each time she touched the keys, a sense of peace washed over her, replacing the emptiness she often felt in the rest of her life. At first, she only played small tunes, testing her fingers and learning how to make the notes sound the way she wanted. But as time passed, she began experimenting with longer pieces, mixing melodies she had imagined with rhythms she discovered by accident. The piano was becoming an extension of herself, a way to express the feelings she had kept bottled up for so long. At home, she started staying up a little later, thinking about the music she would play the next day. She found herself tapping rhythms on the table, humming tunes while walking through the rooms and sketching little musical notes in her notebook. She no longer felt invisible, because she had found something that belonged to her alone. It was private, yes, but it gave her a quiet power, a sense of self that had been missing before. Every mistake she made at the piano was a lesson, not a failure. And each small improvement made her heart swell with pride. Sometimes, she would close her eyes and imagine a full audience, imagining people listening to her play. At first, the thought terrified her. She could hear imagined whispers, the skeptical looks of classmates, and the fear of being laughed at. But gradually, those imagined fears became smaller than the joy she felt in her music. She realized that the piano didn't care about an audience. It only cared about her feelings, her expression, her presence, and in that she found courage. She began to challenge herself with more difficult pieces. Some afternoons she would sit for hours playing a single piece over and over, trying to get every note right. There were moments of frustration, when her fingers slipped or her rhythm faltered, but she didn't give up. She discovered patience in the process, learning that progress was slow and steady, not instant. The more she practiced, the more the piano seemed to speak to her, teaching her lessons not just about music, but about persistence, confidence, and self-respect. One day, while practicing a particularly tricky piece, she realized she could hear the music differently. She wasn't just pressing keys, she was telling a story. Every note had emotion, every pause had meaning, and every chord carried a part of her heart. She was creating a conversation between herself and the piano, and in that conversation, she was no longer invisible. The room listened even if no one else did, and for the first time she felt fully alive. Her routine became a balance between school, home, and her secret music world. Sometimes she had to sneak in after class or wait until the music room was empty. But those moments became the most important part of her day. The piano offered her a refuge from the pressures of life, a place where she could be fully herself. She found herself thinking less about being overlooked and more about how she could grow, how she could improve, how she could let her music speak for her. She started noticing changes in other parts of her life. At school, she felt a quiet confidence she had never experienced before. Even when no one paid attention, she walked with her shoulders back and her head held high. She raised her hand in class more often, answered questions she wasn't sure about, and tried new activities she had previously avoided. The piano had given her a foundation of courage, a belief in herself that slowly began to affect every aspect of her life. Sometimes, she imagined showing someone her music, though she didn't yet have the courage to do it. The thought of someone hearing her play made her stomach twist with nervous excitement. She imagined their surprise, their smiles, the way they might finally see her. It was a dream she held close, a goal she silently worked toward each day. Every note she played, every rhythm she perfected, brought her closer to that moment when she could step out of the shadows and let the world hear her voice. She also started to create her own pieces. At first they were simple, a combination of notes that felt right to her fingers. But over time they became more complex, full of emotion, full of her own story. She kept these compositions in a notebook, writing down each note and line with care. They were hers entirely, a reflection of her inner world, a way to communicate without words. In those compositions she found freedom, beauty, and a connection to herself she had never felt before. The music room became more than a sanctuary. It became a classroom of life. She learned discipline through practice, resilience through mistakes, and creativity through experimentation. She found joy in small accomplishments and patience in long struggles. Each session at the piano taught her something about herself, about the world, and about the quiet strength that comes from persistence. She realized that she didn't need anyone's recognition to feel valuable. Her own efforts and discoveries were enough to give her meaning. Her imagination and her music started to blend. She pictured stories behind the pieces she played, imagining a character walking through a city, feeling hope, fear, and joy with each step. The piano became a storyteller, and she became both the narrator and the listener. This deepened her connection to the music, making each session feel like an adventure. Every note was a brushstroke on a canvas, every chord a sentence in a story she alone could tell. The more she practiced, the more the piano seemed to understand her. There were moments when she hit the wrong key and felt frustrated, but she learned to laugh softly and start again. She began to realize that perfection wasn't the goal, expression was. Each time she played, she communicated something that words could not. And with each session, she felt a quiet sense of accomplishment and pride that no hallway glance or passing comment had ever given her. One afternoon, she discovered a small, broken metronome in the corner of the music room. She dusted it off and tried to make it work, learning to keep rhythm and timing with the steady tick-tock. It became another tool in her journey, helping her understand structure, pace, and flow. She realized that music was not only about emotion but about control, balance, and understanding. She marveled at how much she could learn when she focused, when she combined creativity with effort. Her friends at school still didn't notice her, but it no longer hurt as much. She had found something more important than fleeting attention or approval. She had discovered a voice, a talent, and a world where she mattered. The piano had given her a sense of identity, a foundation of self-worth that no external recognition could shake. She had grown quietly, steadily, and with purpose. Even as her skills improved, she kept the music room a secret. It was her private world, her personal space where she could be completely free. She knew that one day she might share her music, but for now she relished the solitude, the privacy, and the control she had over her own journey. Every key she pressed, every note she played was a small act of defiance against the world that had overlooked her for so long. And so, she continued her practice day after day. Each visit strengthened her, each mistake taught her something, each small success filled her with pride. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was a part of her, a companion, and a guide. She had learned patience, courage, and self-expression. She had found a voice that could not be ignored, even if the world had yet to hear it. The girl who had once been invisible was growing, note by note, chord by chord, melody by melody, into someone unforgettable. One morning, the school announced a small talent show that would be held in the auditorium. Most students laughed and whispered among themselves, excited to show off their skills. She heard the announcement while walking through the hallway and paused, feeling a mixture of fear and curiosity. The thought of performing in front of others made her stomach twist, but it also sparked a small fire in her chest. She had been playing the piano in secret for months, and the idea of sharing her music, even for a few minutes, seemed both thrilling and terrifying. At first, she thought about ignoring the opportunity, telling herself it was better to stay invisible, where mistakes wouldn't matter. But the piano had given her courage she had never known before. She remembered the hours she had spent practicing, the joy she had felt, the music that had become a part of her. Maybe, just maybe, she could take that leap. She decided to sign up, trembling slightly as she handed in the form. Her heart raced as she walked away, half hoping someone would laugh at the idea and half hoping they would be amazed. The days leading up to the talent show were a whirlwind of emotions. She practiced obsessively, making sure every note was just right. She stumbled, hit wrong keys, and sometimes grew frustrated, but she kept going. Each mistake was a lesson, each small success a boost of confidence. She imagined the audience, their faces curious and expectant, and tried to play through the nerves in her mind. Sometimes she practiced in the music room alone, the sunlight spilling through the windows, imagining applause that hadn't yet come. She felt her fingers move with more precision, her timing becoming more steady, her heart learning to calm itself before each note. On the day of the talent show, she felt a mixture of dread and excitement. She wore simple clothes and kept to herself, carrying a small notebook with her music in case she needed it. Backstage, she watched other students perform, singing, dancing, playing instruments. She admired their courage, wondering if she would ever feel as confident as they did. But she also reminded herself of the countless hours she had spent with her piano, the music that was hers alone, and the voice that had been growing quietly inside her. When her turn finally came, she walked onto the stage, her hands trembling slightly. The bright lights made the auditorium feel enormous, and the murmur of the audience filled her ears. She took a deep breath and approached the piano at the center. Her fingers hovered above the keys, her heart pounding like a drum. She closed her eyes for a moment, imagining herself in the music room alone with her piano where she had always felt safe. Then she pressed the first key. The sound filled the auditorium, clear and strong. She felt a shiver run down her spine as the music flowed through her fingers, through her body, and into the room. At first, she worried that the audience wouldn't notice, that they would ignore her as they always had. But then she looked up, and for the first time she saw something different. People were leaning forward, listening intently, their eyes focused on her hands, on the music, on the way she was telling a story through sound. She felt a rush of joy and relief that made her chest expand. For the first time, someone outside her secret world was truly paying attention. As she played, she lost herself in the music, forgetting about the audience, forgetting about fear, forgetting about the invisible girl she had once been. Each note carried emotion, each chord a story. She poured all her feelings into the performance, the loneliness, the hope, the frustration, and the joy that had been building inside her for months. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was her voice speaking loudly and clearly in a world that had often ignored her. She felt free in a way she had never imagined, as if she had finally stepped out of the shadows into the light. The audience responded, some leaning forward with wide eyes, some closing their eyes to feel the music, and some quietly tapping their feet to the rhythm. She noticed a few teachers smiling, a couple of students nodding, and a ripple of admiration spreading through the room. It was a subtle response, but it was enough. She felt seen. She felt valued. She felt unforgettable in a way that words could not describe. The piano had given her a voice, and now the world was listening. When she finished the piece, the auditorium was silent for a moment, as if everyone was holding their breath, unsure of how to respond to the sudden intensity of emotion they had experienced. Then slowly applause began. It started quietly, then grew louder, filling the room with sound that made her eyes water. She stood, slightly trembling, and bowed. The music had been hers, but the recognition belonged to both her and everyone who had listened. For the first time, she realized that her talent, her dedication, and her courage had transformed her presence. She was no longer just another quiet girl in the hallway. She was someone unforgettable, at least in that moment. Backstage, she could hardly believe what had happened. People came up to her, smiling, complimenting her and asking her questions about the piece she had played. For once, she was not ignored. She felt a warm glow of pride and happiness, something she had only imagined before. She realized that the piano had not just given her music. It had given her confidence, a sense of self-worth, and the courage to step into the world. She had faced fear and uncertainty and had emerged stronger and more visible than ever before. That night, as she lay in bed, she thought about the performance again and again. She remembered the first hesitant notes she had pressed in the music room, the mistakes she had made, the long hours of practice, and the quiet victories that had led her to this moment. She realized that the journey had been as important as the performance. Every small effort, every hour of practice, every note played in secret, had contributed to the courage that now allowed her to shine in front of an audience. The piano had given her more than music. It had given her a sense of identity and self-belief that would stay with her forever. In the days that followed, people continued to talk about her performance. Some classmates who had ignored her before now looked at her differently. Teachers praised her dedication and talent. She received encouragement and invitations to play in other school events. For once, the world seemed to notice her in a way it never had before. But what mattered most was not the attention itself. It was the knowledge that she had the courage to step out, to share her voice, and to show that she could be more than invisible. She continued practicing, driven by the memory of the talent show. The piano was no longer just a secret friend. It was a bridge to the world, a way to connect with people through the beauty of music. She imagined future performances, compositions she wanted to create, and the ways she could inspire others who felt invisible or overlooked. The experience had changed her perspective, showing her that even a quiet girl with no recognition could step into the spotlight and leave a lasting impression. The piano had taught her resilience, patience, creativity, and courage. It had shown her that her voice mattered, that her effort was valuable, and that the world could see her in a new light if she dared to step forward. She realized that her journey was just beginning, that each performance would be a new opportunity to grow and share herself. And while the applause was wonderful, what she cherished most was the feeling of being fully alive, fully herself, and truly unforgettable for the first time in her life. After her first performance, everything changed slowly but noticeably. Students who had ignored her now nodded and smiled in the hallway, some even offering compliments. Teachers began to acknowledge her effort and dedication, praising her persistence and talent. She noticed the difference, but she did not let it change who she was. She remained quiet, humble and thoughtful, knowing that the piano had given her a voice she had never had before. Recognition was rewarding, yes, but what truly mattered was the journey she had taken to reach this point. Her life began to revolve around music more than ever. She started experimenting with new pieces, trying different styles and exploring rhythms and melodies she had never imagined. She would spend hours after school in the music room, creating, practicing, and refining her technique. The piano had become an extension of herself, and through it she could express thoughts and emotions that had previously remained hidden. It was no longer a secret. It was her tool to communicate, to grow, and to inspire. Word of her talent spread beyond her school. A few local events invited her to perform, And while she felt nervous about stepping outside her familiar world, she also felt the thrill of sharing her music with new audiences. Each performance added confidence. Each audience reaction reinforced her belief that she was capable of more than she had ever imagined. She began to understand that her talent could open doors, not only to recognition but to experiences that could shape her future. The music room, once her private refuge, now became a place of experimentation and creativity. She started composing her own pieces, putting personal experiences into notes and rhythms. Each composition was a reflection of her journey, her loneliness, her hopes, her struggles, and her victories. Writing music became a way for her to process feelings, to tell stories that words could not capture. She discovered a sense of purpose and fulfillment that had been missing from her life for so long. Even as she grew more confident, she remained aware of the importance of perseverance. Not every performance went perfectly, and not every piece came easily. She experienced moments of frustration and doubt, but the piano had taught her that growth came from persistence. Mistakes were not failures. They were lessons. Each challenge was an opportunity to improve, and she learned to embrace the process rather than fear it. This mindset spread to other areas of her life, making her more resilient, patient, and thoughtful in everything she did. Her family began to notice the change in her demeanor as well. They saw her excitement, her determination, and the way her eyes lit up when she spoke about music. Slowly, they became supportive, attending her small performances, asking her about her compositions, and encouraging her growth. It was a quiet but meaningful shift as the world around her started to recognize the girl who had once been invisible. She felt grateful, but she never forgot the days when no one noticed her, the quiet hours spent alone in the music room, and the piano that had been her companion through it all. Friends at school began to approach her differently. Some wanted to learn about her music. Others wanted to hear her play during lunch breaks or after classes. She shared small parts of her knowledge, teaching a friend a simple melody or explaining how a particular piece made her feel. Through these interactions, she realized that her talent could not only give her a voice, but could also inspire and connect with others. She found joy in helping others discover the beauty of music and the confidence it could bring. Her confidence in performing led her to explore new opportunities. She auditioned for larger events, tried different venues, and even began writing her own arrangements for pieces she loved. Each step brought new challenges, but she welcomed them, knowing that each challenge was a chance to grow. She discovered that the world could be more receptive than she had imagined, and that courage combined with talent could create opportunities she had never thought possible. Her compositions became more complex and emotional. She poured her experiences into the music, letting her feelings guide the flow of notes and chords. People who listened were moved, not just by her skill, but by the sincerity and depth of emotion in her playing. She realized that music could communicate in ways that words could not, bridging gaps and connecting people. The piano had become not just a part of her life, but a tool to touch the hearts of others. Mentors and teachers who recognized her talent offered guidance, helping her refine technique and explore new musical ideas. They encouraged her to push beyond her comfort zone, to experiment with new styles, and to embrace challenges as a part of growth. Through their support, she learned to balance ambition with patience, creativity with discipline. The lessons she learned were not only about music, but about life, resilience, and self-belief. Despite growing recognition, she remained grounded. She knew that her journey had started in solitude, in quiet hours of practice, and that the essence of her talent was in the dedication and love she put into her craft. She valued authenticity over applause, effort over shortcuts, and expression over perfection. These principles guided her as she continued to explore music, perform for audiences, and develop her own unique voice. She also began to mentor younger students who were struggling to find their confidence, sharing her experiences and encouraging them to pursue their own passions. She understood the feeling of being overlooked, the pain of invisibility, and the transformative power of finding a personal voice. Her guidance was gentle, patient, and encouraging, offering the same support she had once wished for. In helping others, she found a deeper sense of fulfillment and purpose. Through all these experiences, she realized that her journey was not only about talent, but about courage, perseverance, and self-discovery. The girl who had once been ignored had transformed into someone capable of inspiring, connecting, and leading. Her music had been the catalyst, but the growth came from within. From her willingness to embrace challenges, express herself, and believe in her own worth, the piano remained central to her life, a constant source of comfort, creativity, and expression. Each note she played reminded her of how far she had come, from the quiet girl who felt invisible to the confident young musician who was shaping her own path. She had discovered that recognition was rewarding, but the true value lay in the journey, the effort, and the courage to share herself with the world. As she continued to perform and compose, she also began to think about the future, imagining ways to use her talent to touch even more lives. She envisioned teaching, collaborating with other musicians, and performing in larger venues. Each goal was ambitious, but she approached it with the same determination and patience that had guided her from the beginning. She knew that the piano had given her not just music, but a foundation for a lifetime of growth, expression, and impact. In the end, she understood that being unforgettable was not just about the applause or recognition. It was about embracing who she was, using her talents to connect with others, and growing through each challenge and success. She had learned that courage, dedication, and authenticity could transform not only her own life but also the lives of those she touched through her music. The girl who had once been ignored had become a symbol of hope, resilience, and the power of discovering one's voice. As time passed, she became a familiar presence in school and the local community, known not just for her talent, but for her dedication, humility, and quiet strength. People who had once overlooked her now sought her out, curious about her music and inspired by her journey. She remained grounded, however, understanding that the attention she received was a reflection of her efforts and passion, not a sudden transformation of who she was. She had grown slowly, steadily, and every step had been earned through dedication, practice, and courage. She continued to explore music in deeper ways, not only performing but composing pieces that expressed her feelings and experiences. Her music became more complex, full of emotion, and reflective of her journey from invisibility to recognition. Each composition was a story, a snapshot of her life and a message to others who might feel unseen. She began to share these compositions with her friends, family, and small audiences, watching as people responded with admiration and heartfelt connection. It was not just the sound of the piano that touched them, but the sincerity and emotion behind every note. Her confidence and presence inspired others who had felt invisible or overlooked. Younger students began to approach her for advice, hoping to learn from her experiences. She shared what she had learned about patience, practice, and perseverance. She encouraged them to pursue their own passions, to believe in themselves, and to find their own voices, no matter how quiet they might feel. Through her guidance, she realized that her journey was not only about her own growth, but also about helping others discover their potential. The piano remained a central part of her life, a companion and a guide. She discovered new pieces, experimented with styles from different cultures and eras, and even collaborated with other musicians when the opportunity arose. Each experience broadened her perspective, teaching her that music was not only a personal expression, but also a way to connect people across boundaries. She learned that sharing her talent was not about seeking praise, but about creating moments of beauty and understanding. Performances became more frequent and varied. She played at school events, community gatherings, and local competitions. With each performance, she felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness, but she embraced it as part of the experience. She learned to transform fear into focus, to use her emotions to enhance her expression, and to enjoy the connection she created with her audience. People listened, some moved to tears, others smiling with appreciation, and she realized that her music had a power beyond her imagination. Even as she gained recognition, she remained humble and reflective. She remembered the quiet afternoons spent alone in the music room, the hours of practice when no one was watching, and the fear she had felt before her first public performance. Those memories grounded her, reminding her that her achievements were the result of consistent effort and a love for her craft. She knew that fame or attention was temporary, but the skills, experiences, and personal growth she gained through music would last a lifetime. She also became aware of the responsibility that came with her talent. She understood that her story could inspire others, that the courage she had developed could encourage someone else to pursue their dreams. She started volunteering to teach younger students, helping them discover the joy of music and the satisfaction of developing a skill. She shared not only techniques and notes, but also the lessons she had learned about patience, persistence, and self-belief. Her guidance was gentle but firm, allowing others to grow at their own pace while offering encouragement and support. Over time, she began composing larger pieces, including original works that told stories of personal struggle, hope, and triumph. She performed these compositions for small audiences at first, then gradually for larger groups. Each performance reinforced her confidence, deepened her understanding of music, and strengthened her belief in the value of expressing oneself fully. She realized that her journey had started with a single note in a quiet room, and now, years later, those notes had transformed into a symphony of experience, emotion, and inspiration. Her journey also taught her about resilience. Not every performance went perfectly. Mistakes happened, nerves flared, and challenges arose. But she had learned to view these moments not as failures but as opportunities for growth. Each setback became a lesson, each challenge a chance to improve. She developed a mindset that balanced ambition with patience, determination with humility. These qualities extended beyond music, influencing her approach to school, friendships, and life in general. As she matured, she recognized the value of sharing her story alongside her music. People were inspired not only by her skill but by the journey she had taken, from feeling invisible to finding her voice and sharing it with the world. She spoke about her experiences, encouraging others to pursue their passions, embrace challenges, and cultivate resilience. She became a role model for those who felt overlooked, showing that dedication, courage, and self-belief could transform even the quietest, most unnoticed individuals into someone unforgettable. Her relationship with the piano remained intimate and personal. Even after performing for large audiences and receiving praise, she often returned to the music room alone, playing for the joy of creation rather than recognition. These moments reminded her of where she had started, of the girl who had once felt invisible, and of the power of discovering and nurturing one's talent. The piano had given her a voice, a sense of identity, and a means of expression that was uniquely her own. Through her journey, she also discovered the importance of empathy and connection. Music had taught her to listen deeply, to feel emotions beyond words, and to communicate with sensitivity. She applied these lessons to her interactions with others, developing deeper friendships and understanding the struggles of those around her. Her music became a bridge connecting people through shared emotion and experience. As she looked toward the future, she dreamed of expanding her reach, performing in new venues, composing larger works, collaborating with other artists, and inspiring even more people through her music. She remained committed to continuous learning and growth, understanding that talent alone was not enough. It required dedication, resilience, and a willingness to embrace challenges. She carried the lessons of her journey with her: courage, patience, humility, and the power of self-expression. The girl who had once been ignored had transformed into someone who was not only recognized, but also respected and admired. Her journey demonstrated that being unforgettable was not about seeking attention, but about cultivating one's talents, persevering through challenges, and using one's abilities to inspire and connect with others. She had discovered that true impact came from authenticity, dedication, and a willingness to share one's unique voice. In the quiet moments, she still returned to her music room, playing softly for herself and reflecting on her journey. Each note was a reminder of how far she had come, from the lonely, invisible girl to a young woman whose presence and talent could not be overlooked. The piano had been more than an instrument. It had been a guide, a companion, and a source of empowerment. Through it, she had learned that even the quietest voices, when nurtured with courage and dedication, could become unforgettable.